Hello and a very warm welcome to all the participants and panelists joining us today in this webinar series. Today is the webinar 2 on the topic of looking at the again vaccine trials, and today we will be hearing voices and experiences from the ground. Briefly to introduce today's today's panel will be moderated by Sandhya Srinivasan, who will be familiarizing us with the guest speakers of the day. To introduce Sandhya to all of you, Sandhya Srinivasan is a freelance health writer and consulting editor with the Indian Journal of Medical Ethics. She works in the area of research and ethics on public health, clinical trials. She has also served on the institutional ethics committees of the National Institute for Research in Reproduction and of the Anusandhan Trust. She has published and edited on varied topics related to public health, ethics, and reproductive technologies. She is also the trustee for the Center for Communication Development Studies, Pune. Thank you, Sandhya, for joining us. And before I hand over this panel to you, I will just take a minute to do a quick recap of the previous webinar that was held on 7th of November, that is day before. So the webinar one was on the topic of scientific and ethical issues in COVID vaccine trials. It was joined by Sarojini N, who introduced the series of the webinars, and she started with key objectives and really laid out the context for holding this webinar. Then the panel was joined by Amar Jasani, who introduced the topic of this first webinar and also added his observations and moderated the panel discussion following each speaker's presentations. In terms of speakers, we had Dr. Satyajit Rath, who explained the types of vaccine candidates for COVID-19, the routes of and doses of the vaccine candidates, the current phases of the trials. He also spoke about the outcome for these trials, the regulatory requirement around efficacy, which he particularly focused on. He raises the concerns around placebo issues in these trials. And he also briefly spoke about the Lancet article, which throws out the concerns on vaccine nationalism and vaccine capitalism. Then we were later joined by Dr. Shantanu Tripathi in the panel, who explained the standard process, phases, and time it takes to develop vaccines. And in the current context of how during the pandemic, how certain phases are being clubbed in and time is being cut short. He also explained what is understood by standard of care. He then spoke about the concerns around range of varied interrelated issues around injuries, types of injuries or death, adverse events, medical management, and causalities, and the compensation payable. Then the final panelist for that webinar was Veena Johari, who basically brought the discussion focused on the participants of the trials who take part in these trials, talked about their vulnerability, the influences that may push them to enter trials, and the ethical concerns around it, the rights-based framework to look at these issues, the principles of informed consent, the legal and ethical considerations. And she also really spoke about the role of ethics committees and how they have to play the monitoring role, and the importance of public engagement. She brought in that how there should be a participatory approach, and we should really look at how what is going on today to reflect on it from this framework. Many interesting questions were raised by the participants, and there were also and we had a very insightful discussions, both following the chat box in this format and also during the open discussion format, which we hope to be doing today as well. The presentations have been uploaded on the Sama website, where we are also updating and uploading all the webinar details and Zoom details. And with this, I request and welcome Sandhya to take over from here. Thanks, Sandhya.
Thanks, Atsa. Thanks for the introduction. And thanks for summarizing Saturday's webinar, because that lays down the background for today's panel discussion. So from the general context which I've laid out on clinical trials for the COVID vaccine, on the scientific issues, on questions of compensation, questions of public engagement and whether informed consent can be possible. Here today we'll talk about really the idea is to try and get a close-up picture. Okay, what are people seeing who are involved in clinical trials on the ground, involved in any way. And our interest, of course, is looking at the COVID-19 vaccine trial. And we had hoped to get the experiences and opinions of, participants, ethics committees, members, media, investigators, and industry. And I think we've done an okay job. Since we were able to get everybody, we couldn't get investigators and we couldn't get industry representatives, which is, I think, there are gaps, and we can talk about why those gaps are there. But we do have somebody who will lay out the picture for us, a senior researcher who conducted a very important trial, a vaccine trial earlier, for a vaccine against HIV. And I think we can benefit from his insights and his experiences. So with that, I want to introduce the first speaker, Dr. Sanjay Mehendale, who's currently research director of the research in the PD Hinduja Hospital and Medical Research Center in Bombay. Dr. Mehendale has spent 32 years in research institutes at the Indian Council of Medical Research, and he retired as Additional Director General of the ICMR. He's a member of many national and working groups of the ICMR, the Department of Biotechnology, and the National AIDS Control Organization. His extensive research work includes studies of various infectious diseases, and epidemiological and social behavioral studies, and clinical trials related to HIV/AIDS. Dr. Mehendale, the HIV vaccine trials conducted by NARI are seen as a kind of model for vaccine trials, okay, in terms of the community, the kind of informed consent process, recruitment, committee for grievance redressal. So could you talk about how these trials, challenges you saw there, how you address them? Because in some sense, the HIV vaccine trials can teach us something for other trials, similar trials in India, or other vaccine trials in India. Dr. Mehendale?
Yeah, hi Sandhya. I will share with you some of my experiences with while conducting phase 1 HIV vaccine trials. In fact, I was involved in 2 HIV phase 1 vaccine trials, which were conducted at that time. This was the time around 2005, 2006, when these were conducted. And we had lots of good experiences. We had some challenges that we faced. And I'll try to give you a short overview of what happened during that period of time. The phase 1 trials, as all of you know, of any vaccine essentially require recruitment of healthy adult volunteers into the study or into the clinical trial. So that's a huge challenge, and it was for the first time that I was facing this kind of a experience any time in my life, and so I had a lot to learn during this particular process. But we realized this was a collaborative study that we did with National AIDS Control Organization, Indian Council of Medical Research, and International AIDS Vaccine Initiative. All of us felt that it was very important to engage community in a very big way. As a part of US National Institute of Health sponsored projects in NARI, Pune, National AIDS Research Institute, we had started a study called Preparation for AIDS Vaccine Evaluation. And remember, I'm talking about 1993-94, where there was no vaccine in sight. But there was definitely some insight that if we start some preparation of some sites, it is a tedious task. And whenever vaccine comes in existence, then we just can't start off right at that point of time. We will have to have a lot of background work done. And that's why this study was started. We started recruiting individuals who were practicing high-risk behavior for HIV infection and started doing their follow-up at periodic intervals to try and figure out at what rate they were getting HIV infected, what were the common factors that were leading to HIV infection in these groups, and could these behaviors be modified. This was evidence which we had collected long back, but it took nearly, say, 15 years, 20 years after that, when in early 2000, a vaccine candidate actually came for discussion and became available for testing in India. And so we decided to do in National AIDS Research Institute a needs assessment study. And this needs assessment study, we tried to reach out to different target groups to figure out what their concerns would be if they want to participate in the study. And naturally, side effects, then possibility of getting HIV infected, and if they test HIV positive, how would they then be accepted in the community? Would it have any problem as far as employment is concerned? All such kinds of concerns were raised by them. But to get a support at the national level, we tried to tried to undertake several activities, including establishing a parliamentarians forum, and which was a group of people sitting in the parliament and who were actually the political decision makers, policy makers, to whom we tried to talk about what is the importance of doing such vaccine studies in India. Then we had regional meetings in the states. These trials were done in Tamil Nadu and in Maharashtra. So we talked with the state governments and the concerned policymakers in the states. Then we had regional workshops for the non-governmental organizations and community-based organizations in the same states. In Pune, to talk about specifically, we did also conduct a meeting in Pune Municipal Council, addressing all the councillors, explaining to them like what does this vaccine trial mean. We did a workshop with media and science writers forum. We addressed them, actually looked into each problem that they had or each concern that they had. We tried to address that. But two key features I would say that we came across, and they are the lessons learned as far as I am concerned. We established a community advisory board, a broad group of people in different spheres of life who could guide us with respect to so many things while conducting the clinical trial. And we actually devised a community involvement plan. We identified 6 or 7 NGOs in Pune who were willing to work with us. And they identified their own peers whom we trained. And this network we used for actually trying to identify people who would want to participate in the studies. So this involvement of NGOs, we also had some activists and stakeholders, other stakeholders also engaged in this activity. Like we talked with groups of PLHIVs, people living with HIV and AIDS, because these are the ones who have very active stakes in this disease per se. Then we did work very actively with national AIDS control organizations and its peripherals all over the different states. We as the investigating center and site had to do a lot of work to create an infrastructure. And any clinical trial requires clinical laboratory, data management, and community infrastructure. We all created that. All of us got trained for conducting phase 1 vaccine trials in the country. So then the informed consent process, you did also talk about that, Sandhya. So this was a very challenging task that we had. People had lots of concerns about this. They said, are you really going to do a good job for this? And I can tell you, I was grilled in large meetings. There was a national level expert group meeting which was set up, 20-25 people, and I presented this informed consent form to them at least 3 times, periodically, taking into all their suggestions, comments, modifying them, again presenting it to them. And finally, we were able to come up with 2 types of consent forms, one for screening and one for enrollment. One important thing we used here was the test of understanding. So our ethics committee suggested to us that it is not important to just give an informed consent, but try and also to figure out whether all those who are willing to sign the informed consent form have truly understood the process. So we developed a particular model here wherein every single participant had to answer at least 7 of the 10 questions, 5 of which were the critical questions they had to be right, and of the remaining 5 they could answer 2, so as to make the total score 7 here. And they could do this test only twice. Those who did not qualify were not taken into the vaccine trial. So a very rigorous mechanism was set up, but we were able to do this informed consent pretty well. Then recruitment itself also, how to get these healthy adult volunteers from. We did a lot of thinking about that, and then we decided that probably there is not a group that we need to approach here. We have to approach a lot of people. They may be the communities, they may be housing societies, they may be government houses, they may be educational institutes, different kinds of doctors and other professional groups. We address so many of them, and we built a structure wherein we had 3 types of meetings that we conducted for people. In the first one, we just gave them the information, and at the exit point, we kept some brochures which they could pick up, and all those who were interested then could call us back, and then we could go for setting up a level 2 meeting, which were small meetings of 10 to 20 people, with whom we then had a detailed chat to further explore their commitment to participate in the research. And those who continued to have interest, we took them into the third level, which were one-to-one meetings, which were there to assess the real commitment and interest of the person in participating. So to address the grievances of people, we set up a grievance redressal committee consisting of a social scientist, a lawyer, a senior judge, in fact, and a senior physician. And so the Central Ethics Committee of ICMR also suggested to us that it is not only this arbitration board or redressal board that should listen to the grievances, there should be an arbitrator allowed also for the participant to present his case. So all this was done. So there were multiple people who were giving us advice, and we were learning it for the first time. And this was really a good learning experience for all of us, because we were able to absorb all these learnings and actually able to modulate ourselves to get all those things done in the long run. Did we face any challenges? We did. So several levels of reviews in different places. HIV, as all of you know, is a very sensitive issue per se. Doing a phase 1 trial itself was considered as very challenging. So various reviews like scientific reviews, ethical reviews, reviews by Drug Controller General of India, the Genetic Engineering Approval Committee, because what we were testing was a genetically engineered product. Then the Health Ministry Screening Committee, the Central Ethics Committee, all these were truly challenging things, but we went around very patiently. So, we had to modify our informed consent form to accommodate the comments. Then some blood tests which were for patient safety got added. Mind you, this was a multi-centric trial, the first one, with 2 sites in Germany, 2 sites in Belgium. But we persisted. We said, even if it is a multi-centric trial, if our ethics committees have suggested that if we have to increase the waiting time of our study participant to 4 hours instead of 1 hour, we will go and do it. So, and this was approved by the central coordinating committee of this particular trial, and we went on to get in all these modifications done. So convincing stakeholders in the recruitment process itself was a huge issue. People also suggested to us that you should do some kind of psychological testing of volunteers to ensure that you are only getting correct volunteers into your study. So which are the right tests to do that? We didn't know that. So we went on looking for different kinds of tests, had wide consultations on around that particular issue, and came up with a test eventually with some consultation around an expert opinion, and we employed that. So what were the lessons that we learned? We learned some important lessons. One is community involvement is the key. NGO partnership and involvement of key stakeholders was very important, and it helped us all throughout our trial. Then focus on community information was also very critical here. All correct information was given to people. We at the first, we had a feeling that we are big experts in creating community information material. But when we called experts to opine on the one which we had prepared, they just said, what you have done is not a good thing. We would like to suggest you so many things, and the suggestions that they gave us were truly good, because these were the experts, and we therefore learned that taking expert opinion on certain key issues is a critical issue. Then we also learned that it is possible to educate the community and explain even very complex technical terms to people in very simple language. This in itself was a big challenge, but we were able to do that. So I think these were the kind of important lessons that we learned. This was a good process, a challenging process, and I believe COVID has similar challenges all around that. And I truly feel that whosoever are the stakeholders involved in this process, including the investigators, have something to learn from what we did several years ago.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'm going to stop on this particular point at this.
Okay, we'll come back to you. Thank you so much for laying out the entire picture and for making the point that community involvement at every level is important for a vaccine trial like this. And I think it's very relevant because the HIV vaccine trial is also very, very much in the public eye, and there was a feeling of desperation, of looking for a vaccine for HIV. And there's the same feeling now about the COVID-19 vaccine. It's seen as the kind of the only solution in front of us, that without a vaccine, we are nowhere. So I think that sort of tells us about the kinds of issues we'll be looking at here. And To start off, the next stage, we'd like to talk to people who have actually taken part in the COVID-19 vaccine trials. And we have two of them over here. The first speaker is Mr. Anil Hebbar. Mr. Hebbar is can be described as a healthcare entrepreneur. He has been working in medical training for some time. What is interesting is he's been associated with social movements for decades. And for the last 8 months, he's been involved in COVID relief activities for nonprofits, running migrant worker camps, community kitchens, and many other interventions in the last 7 months. And a little while ago, he volunteered for the trial of COVID Shield, which is being tested by the Serum Institute of India, which has an agreement with the Oxford Vaccine Group. So, why did he volunteer? Why did you volunteer, Mr. Hebbar? What brought you there, and what is the entire process? What is the process of once you volunteered? What happened next?
Yeah. So when the lockdown was announced sometime around 15 March or so in Maharashtra, we first couple of days, 2-3 days, I was also at home and got bored quickly. And I also started getting uneasy because we have been working in the slums of Mumbai through Ghar Bachao, Ghar Badao Andolan, and we knew that a lot of people in the slums are daily wage earners and they need to work in order to have their houses going. So we came together. There was a meeting of JSA around the 17th or 18th in Dr. Sanjay Mehenda's office, and that's where we all got together and decided to start something in terms of relief work in the slums. So Bilal, who leads JSA in Mumbai, myself, Brinal, we all got together and we made a plan that day. And initially we thought about 1,000 families we will feed. And one thing led to the other. And first we started distributing rations. Then we felt that it was not sustainable. It was not possible for everyone. So then we started community kitchens. We ran a camp for 300 immigrants and migrants. So I was wondering why is it that none of us in our team has contracted the virus. So every now and then we used to do an RT-PCR test on ourselves or an antibody test to find out whether we got infected. And all of us, we have about 150 people in our team, and all of us have remained free of COVID. And this is something that we are not able to understand. And so um, uh, I was waiting for an opportunity to sort of experiment on myself in a way. And a friend of mine in Pune one day called me up saying that there is a trial for Covishield of Serum Institute, which is going on in KM Hospital, and they have already enrolled about 55 participants, and they're finding it a little difficult to get more participants quickly. They wanted 100. So he said, would you want to go and volunteer? I immediately said yes. Volunteering for research has not been very new in my family. Like all of us have pledged to donate our bodies after our death. My dad also, 3 years back when he died, we gave his body for medical research. So I didn't think twice about this. I went and enrolled myself in the trial. And it was also because somewhere I felt that the vaccine should come out fast because a lot of people whom we knew were dying one by one. At least there are 20 people I can count now whom I knew who have lost their lives in this disease. So I immediately went to KM Hospital the next day and asked them whether I can participate in the trial. They said first thing was when they did the trial in Europe and US, the cutoff age was 55 and I was 56. But then they said in India, they're relaxing the upper age limit to 70. And so they said I can participate if the other conditions are met. That is, I should not have diabetes, I should not have blood pressure, and I should not have been infected earlier with the disease. So the next day I went there and they did a RT-PCR test and antibody test. And in the evening, I got a call saying that I'm cleared. All the reports are normal and I've not been infected before, so I can participate in the trial. So that's how it happened. So the first contact I had made was on the 5th of October, and on the 8th of October, I had got the first shot. And I was told before we signed the consent form, about 20 minutes, the doctor spent with us explaining what it is and what were the complications in the earlier trial and things like that. So, and they also told us that we can quit the trial at any point if we don't want to be a part of it. So, and then once we signed it, the next day the vaccine was given. Now, 28 days later, we were called again to come there, and I got mine just 2 days back. On the 6th, I got my vaccine, second shot. So that's how it has been so far. We were asked to take paracetamols. The day that you have taken the vaccines, 8 paracetamols, 2 every 6 hours. That was the regimen that was recommended. Other than that, there has been nothing, and so that's how it was.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Hebbar,
Yeah.
for spelling out those details. I thought that it would be good if, following you, Vaishali could speak. Vaishali Janarthanan. Dr. Mehendale gave an idea of the details of the informed consent procedure in the HIV vaccine trial. So perhaps we can talk about, if you could describe what exactly you experienced.
Sure.
Questions, they answered, was it?
Mr. Hebbar and I went together for the trial. And I mean, we've been to game before. It was pretty normal, I would say. But the process involved us, they first asked us the language we're comfortable with. And there and after, of course, it was good that we knew English, so we could also read the form. We were handed the form, but also first we were explained the whole process. I think, like he said, it took about 20 minutes or so. They just wanted to check in with us that we understood everything. So of course, I read the entire form there, sitting there. It was about 9 pages. I think 8 to 9 pages the form was, which explained what the study is, who's conducting it, what's happened so far. We also knew that 55 people or so at that time when we went had already taken, had already been given the vaccine shot, and there has been no complication so far. And we also knew about the UK case wherein there were some complications with something related to the spinal thing, I think. So we were asked if we were aware of that and were still okay. I think they were a bit more concerned about me, maybe I think because being a woman, and so they just, I think I was asked like 3-4 times more if I really knew what I was getting into and if I was planning on having a baby or something, because they don't know if this will have an effect on fertility. So of course I was asked that, and they were like, "Are you sure?" And of course I was. So this happened, and they asked us if we have any questions. They told us that we can withdraw from the study at any point. I think this was a point emphasized properly. Apart from that, I think I was hearing Mr. Mehendale, and I think it sounded really nice. That yeah, it makes sense that that's how informed consent process should look like. But here, I think we already had a sense of what we're getting into. So um, maybe we didn't spend more time on more questions, or we didn't have enough questions. But this was the process that was followed. And then, of course, we had to, like they said, this was the screening part, right? So once we got screened, this the next time we went, we were asked again if, if we're fine and if we're feeling okay, and if we've informed our families. I think more than us, it was if even I had to think about who would be okay with this is my family, because they will be at risk, because I have already given my consent for this, right? So I think when we're doing informed consent, it's not just the individual, but also the persons that they might be a risk to, or that people who are dependent for them. But anyway, so this is what they asked. And the form also has a place where we have to put in a name and contact of a family member. So we did that. And yeah, don't know if I answered everything.
Well, I had some questions to ask of you about whether you understood the possibility that were you aware of the fact that whatever you got was not necessarily protecting you against an infection?
Yes, we did. We did understand
You
that.
were
Yes,
asked that.
we did
So
understand
maybe,
that.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
So it'd
we
be
did
good
understand.
to come back, the details of the consent. I want to know if you can come back to later on. I wanted to now move to Amitabh Sinha, who is the resident editor of the Indian Express in Pune. and who has therefore been following the trials in some detail. To introduce him briefly, he's a resident editor of the Express in Pune, senior journalist, science journalist, working previously with the PTI, Reuters, and BBC. He's written extensively on science and technology, and writing very regularly on the pandemic and all the issues that come up in the pandemic, explaining some of the details, the data, and interviewing scientists and the technologies behind the COVID vaccine. So, Mr. Sinha,
yeah.
Question to you is, Dr. Mehendale sort of described the kind of the ideal trial, the ideal vaccine trial, and Mr. Hebbar and Mr. Janardhanan have described their own personal experiences, but to a large extent, we don't hear much from the participants, though the participants are actually the center of the trial, the way they were, one can say, in the HIV vaccine trial. So my question is, why is it not there? Why are the participants' voices not heard in the media? Is it because the media is not doing the right job, or is it because it is being prevented from doing so? Is it that people are not letting participants speak, whether it's participants or, as I said, investigators, because investigators are missing here. They don't want to speak. Industry is missing here in this discussion because it doesn't want to come forward. So who should we hold responsible? Should we say the media is not working hard enough?
So to directly answer your question, I mean, to be fair, the media did get access to a couple of participants in staged media events. So the first shot when it was being given, and then media, journalists were allowed to come and meet some of the participants who were there on the first day. So that was the only limited access. Now, after that, we have not generally been given access to participants. We don't know who all are were there. And listening to Mr. Hebbar and Ms. Janardhanan, I would guess it wasn't such a bad idea to actually let the people know who these were. I mean, it would have been nice to hear from them. But, just putting them in, putting all these things in context, we also have to take into account the nature of the media that is there in India. So I would understand that probably the developers and the investigators were wary of media hounding these people, the kind of interest that there was in the vaccines and the kind of reporting that was happening. And generally, everyone these days is quite wary of inviting media attention. In fact, there has been a Delhi High Court case today. There's an observation by the Delhi High Court today in a different case, which said, people have become very, very fearful of the media, and to a large extent, media itself is to blame for that. So I would understand that there probably is a reasonable amount of a reasonable argument in trying to protect the participants from being hounded by the media. Now that said, there are lots of other things for which I think media could have been given access, should have been given access, and has not been. Now, there are two things here. As far as creating general awareness about the vaccines, its different stages and the process, and what stages does it go through and what happens at every stage. I think that has been fairly well covered in the media, and I think more or less they've done a reasonable job of trying to raise awareness and trying to inform people of what is going to happen and what exactly is happening in these processes. But the other things, like if we wanted to, when the trials started, for example, and when people wanted to meet the investigators, talk to the investigators, or even the vaccine developers from the companies, or even simple requests like just, can we come and visit your facilities? What are the new facilities that you are setting up? And the Serum Institute has set up a huge new facility just for the coronavirus vaccines. So even simple requests like, can we just come and visit, or can we come and see what are the new machines that you have set up? No, those kind of requests were turned down. No, we have been sending requests almost like every few days to all the like Bharat Biotech, Zydus, Serum, other important stakeholders. Those are the sort of things that I don't see any reason why we should not have been allowed, but there seems to be some amount of an effort going on to keep things under wraps. So that is how it has been there. Otherwise, I would say uh, it's not that it's like whatever information they put out, that is fine. But if we want to ask a few questions, or if we want to gather some more information, that is getting a little tricky. It's not as forthcoming as we would want it to be.
I'd like to add a point here. When I decided to speak to the media, it was mainly because I wanted to demystify the whole thing. Everybody was waiting to hear about the vaccine, and then nothing was coming out about the trial. So I said, let me talk to the press, and I got a warning from the hospital also. The Economic Times editor called up the dean of the hospital, and then he gave a statement that this is not ethical speaking to the press, and the person who's talking might not get the second vaccine. That was what was the statement that the dean had given. But then nothing like that happened, and I got the second shot.
I mean, there are also problems over there. I mean, there are so many. I mean, the idea that you'd be even that it would be suggested that you won't get the second dose. It's problematic as much, even scientifically, that you can intentionally say that I withhold the second dose. Why would you prevent participants from speaking? Why would what is being hidden or what is being protected by preventing participants from speaking? Is what we can maybe come back to this. I think we need to discuss this further, but. Just taking forward this question of, participants' consent, I was wondering if Dr. Rama Baru would speak about this issue in the sense that, okay, let me just introduce first. Dr. Rama Baru is a professor at the Center for Social Medicine and Community Health at Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi, where she's been teaching for more than 25 years. Her research focuses on the social determinants of health, health policy, international health, privatization of health services, and inequalities in health. She's published extensively in journals and contributed to several edited volumes. She's currently on several research committees in the Indian Council of Medical Research, the Department of Health Research, and the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. Dr. Baru, just taking from all the things that people have said so far, I was wondering if you can talk about informed consent in such research. Listening to what, for example, what Vaishali has said about what she was told, what she understood, and the kinds of questions she had. And there seem to be certain, based on Mr. Sinha said, there seem to be certain questions actually about whether the informed consent form was complete. And in that context, I'd want to ask, why is the informed consent form not a public document, the template not a public document, so that people can evaluate the quality of information given in that consent form? Because it's my impression that participants may not necessarily have a very good idea of what the trial is about.
I just want to make 5 points.
Yeah.
One, that I think we need to go back to what Satyajit Rath said in the earlier webinar, that the COVID vaccine initiative was, as you know, an emergency initiative. It was created. It was also had a very clear political backing to it. It was seen as an emergency solution. And even globally, when you read the literature, and the ICMR had in fact a meeting with Fauci addressing it, everybody, all the scientists there agreed that there would be certain modification in the process of the clinical trial. So that I want to place in first. Secondly, I think when we heard Sanjay Mehendale, we saw the kind of groundwork and homework that went into the process of even creating the informed consent form. Now, I like to say a couple of things based on my experience without breaching trust of the procedures of the ethics committee. But we always find that when you have clinical research in relation to either vaccines or a new drug, you find that the protocols that are created by, say, a multinational company is very different from the kind of depth of information that is given in some of the Indian trials. And therefore, I find that that is pretty uneven in the way in which informed consent forms are created. There is also another aspect here, which I think is very important. I don't know how many scientists feel that it is important to actually communicate what they want to do with the subjects that they are recruiting. I say this because it is an unequal relationship. So you have a PIS which may sound very okay, which we all look at and approve, but how is it transacted is a very, very critical question. And I was listening to both Anil Hebbar and to Vaishali. You see, the class background of the person also matters. Who is the participant and what kind of a space does that participant have to exercise and ask certain questions? And to me, the real issue in the COVID-19 is there is uncertainty of science. There is uncertainty of the procedures you followed because you want to produce the vaccine quickly. And therefore, even the scientific community, and I want to say this, that even in the scientific community, there are not that many people who have spoken and spoken about these uncertainties, one. And two, that there isn't been that much discussion on how has the informed consent addressed the anxieties of people who volunteer for the trial. And in this situation, are they being adequately informed? Are they worried about side effects, the management of side effects, what is likely to happen to me in the long run? Those are all uncertainties of science. I think even immunologists will tell you that we don't really know. And I think so to that extent, what Dr. Mehendale actually told us is all those processes clearly were not put in place in the COVID vaccine trial. And I think this is an issue which the Mr. Amitabh also spoke about. So, and we have been writing about it, saying that it is the ethical dimension of this requires transparency and public scrutiny. And from what Mr. Amitabh said, clearly that public scrutiny, the space for public scrutiny, has rather been opaque in this particular trial. I think I'll stop here and maybe come back again.
I want to say something that's related, but slightly, I didn't mention it earlier. I thought Dr. Mehendale can comment on this, which is that the vaccine trials are different from other trials in a specific way. One is you have healthy people who are part of trials, and the intention or the objective in a trial infections. So what you need somebody to get an infection in the trial to prove the vaccine efficacy or non-efficacy. It would seem to put the investigator in there's a certain conflict one can there, which is that as a researcher, I have to protect the people who are in the trial and minimize the risk. At the same time, for the information that I need for some people to get infected to prove this thing. And I was wondering if you can talk about that conflict in the HIV vaccine trial, because I imagine the same conflict is there in this current trial, because there is a question of what do you tell the participant about what needs to be done once you take the vaccine, or the vaccine candidate. Thank you, Dr. Baru, the vaccine candidate or the placebo.
I think, truly speaking, there is no dilemma here. See, if I wear a researcher's hat over here, what I am required to prove, or what I would be required to prove, is a clear distinction between the number of events of the disease that occur in the group that have received the vaccine versus those who have not received the vaccine. So ideally, the vaccine would be proved efficacious if less number of infections are observed among those who have received the vaccine vis-a-vis those who have received a placebo. But this gets known only when we sit down to analyze the data after the completion of the trial. But truly speaking, as a researcher, I should be totally happy if this particular vaccine is able to show its efficacy. But that doesn't mean that as a researcher, I would try to modulate the environment in which I'm working in such a way that I would try to ensure that all the other kind of advice that is really required to be given to people is given in a biased way. As a researcher, I have to be totally unbiased. How could this difference, for example, be vitiated, to tell you very frankly? So if my see, in addition to vaccine, what's happening is in this particular scenario, for example, what will happen is all other COVID prevention say methodologies will have to be equally stressed. And what will be expected is in both the groups, either they are vaccine recipients or they are placebo recipients, they would be equally followed. And so the difference that gets eventually detected will be attributable to this particular vaccine effect. So if the researchers are vitiated, what would happen is if they know that a particular person or if a group of persons is receiving placebo, then if they weaken their counseling efforts on those specific people, allowing more cases to happen in that group against that what is happening in the vaccine group, it is likely to happen. But it doesn't happen because all these trials are blinded trials. You do not know, as a clinical researcher, you do not know what you are giving to your participants. They are blinded to the actual product that is being given. So they look at it as a study product, and they are aware that it can either be a vaccine or it can be a placebo in that particular case. So I suppose this particular bias could essentially be minimized. What is most important in my view is the scientist or the researcher, investigator should have a clear scientific mind. He should go and look at the problem in a very unbiased manner. He should not have any specific prejudices in mind about the vaccine, about the efficacy of the vaccine. When we are trying to prove efficacy of a particular vaccine, as a researcher, I should not have predetermined opinions that yes, I'm going to prove that this particular vaccine is going to be effective. And to this extent, no, it will only be the time that will prove to what extent that particular vaccine is going to be effective. I should have no conflict in of interest, personal interest in and a particular opinion about this. That's about it. And I should have full commitment to the study exactly as per the protocol. I should do the study exactly as it is envisaged in the protocol. I think if it is all followed, then the kind of concern that you are talking about won't exist, because then I would I would do every single procedure exactly the way the book has defined it, and I will not make any differentiation between patient A and patient B, or an individual A and individual B.
Thank you. So the 2 points, if I understand them correctly, are one, that there should not be pressure to provide certain results. That pressure should not exist. People should be aware of the danger of that pressure, and there should be there should be no angle or no area the feeling that we have to get a vaccine out. It's very important to keep in mind that science is what should be guiding this. And the second point would be, there are two ways in which you would get information during this informed consent process. One would be the document itself, the patient information sheet or whatever you call it, in which the various, one is, what the trial is about, what the objectives of the trial are, what your involvement would be, and instructions to you or advice to you. So the advice to you here would be that one, whatever you take does not give you any protection, does not guarantee you any protection, and you must do exactly what you have been advised to do all this time, which is the mask, hand washing, and so on and so forth. This is just something that is being tested. There is no proven vaccine here. So your behavior can change. I was wondering if Mr. Hebbar and Ms. Vaishali could respond to whether it was clear to them in the informed consent form, and also whether it was made clear to them in the conversations they had with the investigators.
No, that is not very clearly explained. Like, we were told that 75 of us would get the vaccine and 25 would get the placebo. And then at the end of 6 months, we will know who got the vaccine and who got the placebo. And those who had the placebo would be given the vaccine at the end of 6 months. This was what was told. And like, we now know that, okay, some of us would have got the placebo, so we need to be very careful and not just act as if we have got the vaccine and we are protected. So we can't let our guard down. But that might not serve the purpose of the trial.
Okay, that's very interesting. That's interesting for two reasons. One is that they have actually made a promise that you would get the vaccine
at the end of 6 months if you have got a placebo. Yeah.
If they've actually said that, I would imagine they don't really have the they're not in a position to make that offer.
Okay.
Because as Dr. Rama Baru pointed out, what you have at the end of 6 months is not necessarily a vaccine.
Yeah.
You have something that's in the process of being
Yeah.
tested. I was wondering if Ms. Vaishali could also respond to this.
So again, yes, I think they did tell us that this helps build immunity, or rather, not build immunity, but I don't think I'm saying it right. But we were aware that this is not the vaccine. And we were also aware that this is different from the one that has been developed in Oxford, but this is coming in as a different name called Covishield. The form also says that. Apart from that, I think we weren't told too much about other things. And then we were also told about that this is a protein of the virus, and not the virus itself.
It is a protein of a gene of the adenovirus, which is the same family as this virus. That is what they were told.
So they explained about why they're using that thing as a carrier. Like they tried to explain it. So that was about it that they did.
And one thing they told was that there would be one trial where 75 would be given this vaccine and 25 would be given the Oxford vaccine. And that trial would be to compare the equivalence of the two vaccines.
Can I interrupt? Anil and Vaishali, did you ever read the informed consent form and the information sheet that was given in a careful manner to get what is the information there before you consent?
Amar, to be very honest with you, I read it after I signed it. I heard what was told on that day, but I didn't read it through because it was literally the same thing that they were saying. Once I went home, I went through each and every word of the consent that I had signed.
I read through it sitting there carefully, all the parts, but I did not pay too much attention to all the technical parts in sense of what is this virus and what is the vaccine, etc. I was looking more at the compensation part and the liability. I wanted to see if they were washing off their hands at any point. They saw there on the form. But yes, I did read through every page before signing, sitting there after hearing them as well. So
that's very interesting, just in terms of if the two of you are in a position to go through the informed consent process in detail, I can only imagine that people who are not in that position or who would not question, there are people who are less likely to question the doctors or the investigators and ask for more details there. That's what I would imagine.
No, it's true. I mean, if I can just add in a point here, I also realize that I probably should have done more studies and taken this more seriously. But I'm realizing that only now. I have to be honest about that. And at the same time, I think it's because it's KM Hospital and because the reference came from Mr. Hebbar, who I've been working with. I think it was just I trusted this way more than I would usually. So, but I do realize now that we probably should have a more rigorous process going through this. But what I generally understood is that it's not a very high risk study, and just went ahead with it. So yeah. So and being from the field and having access to all of this kind of information and having the access to understand this kind of information, I still didn't do enough of what I could have done. So yeah, I agree that this probably may or may not be lesser with other people.
I think that's terribly interesting because, as you said, other people are less likely to go through this in detail. And one thing that when I looked at the protocols for both this trial on CTRI and of the AstraZeneca vaccine trial, from what I understand, they're slightly different in the sense that the trial in India is not to look at the effect, the impact, the efficacy of the vaccine itself. Okay, it is to look at whether the vaccine creates a certain immune response and whether it's safe. Now, the reason I mention that is I do not recollect seeing in the media this point being made very clearly, that the trial in India had certain limited value. It was not looking at the endpoint. It is being looked at elsewhere. And for that reason, I was wondering if Amitabh could speak on whether this was actually covered well in the media, and if not, why not?
Okay, so specifically on the question of protocol, and that probably was different from the AstraZeneca trial. That I don't think we have reported. I'll have to check. I'm not very sure, but I don't remember having seen it. I'm not sure, really not sure, but I don't remember it certainly. Then as to why it might not have been covered, again, I mean, either it. So one, of course, I am not very sure whether it has not been covered. It's just that I do not remember having seen it. It's quite possible that it might have been covered even in our newspaper, for example. But as to why it might not have been covered if it wasn't covered, it can be either that nobody noticed it, nobody went to the CTRI website to see the protocols, or maybe journalists, we consider looking at protocols too complicated an exercise. We probably do not understand, or we do not sometimes make the effort to even we decide early on saying, oh, this might be very technical and we might not be able to understand it, so therefore it's better not to look at it. So that could be a possible reason. But as I want to emphasize again, I'm not sure whether this aspect has been covered or not. It might have been. There's so many things that have been written about the vaccine, but personally, I do not remember having seen this.
Well, the fact that you don't remember seeing it means that at least it didn't have an impact. That point didn't get
quite possible.
Yeah.
Possible.
That's okay.
That's what had I probably seen it somewhere else, then I would have definitely felt the urge to look at it and do the same story again for our newspaper as well.
Okay. So,
but the only thing is that I cannot be like certain that it has not come out anywhere else, or that I have gone through each and everything that has been published about the trials. That is not true. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Baru, I was wondering if you can comment on what these different responses say for the quality of consent and the quality of information out there. What is the messages that are being given about these trials? If on the one hand, participants have not necessarily got a very good idea of what the trial is about, if on the other hand, the media has not necessarily done a very good job of making clear what these trials are about, what they seek to achieve, what do you think it says for the quality of information out there?
I think the quality of information has been pretty patchy. I think those of us who follow this have been trying to piece together and form a certain understanding. But if you look at the entire thrust for the vaccine and the way it has been discussed in the media and even in bringing to the popular imagination, the context is the enormous amount of fear and anxiety of the disease, the real experience of mortality that we have seen. And therefore, the vaccine is the only answer. So the therapeutics, I mean, they had number of interventions which now are being proven one by one as not required, not necessary, not really working on the COVID problem. So then now the entire refrain is the vaccine is the answer. Now, this is not something that the scientific community alone is saying. I mean, clearly that you want to build herd immunity, you need the vaccine. I have no quarrels with that. But it's now become a political project. It's no longer a project of just science and the research in science, but there seems to be the political project which says that we will have the vaccine and we will deliver the vaccine and then COVID-19 will disappear. I mean, that's the way I as a layperson understand it. And therefore, you are creating hope and hype in a situation which is still very fluid and uncertain. And this is really the dilemma, I think, of the COVID-19. And if somebody were to turn around and say, look at the amount of time HIV, the developing of the HIV vaccine took, and we don't have an HIV vaccine even today. So is that what's going to happen with the COVID vaccine? And given the nature of the virus, if it mutates, this particular COVID vaccine that is being developed may not be able to address a mutated form of it. So, I mean, I think one of the things that senior scientists commented is there will not be one COVID vaccine. There will be many COVID vaccines because it'll evolve into a different scenario. So I think the way I look at it is that the vaccine itself has become a political project. So whether it is a Trump who's no longer in power at the moment, he's been voted out. What was his election campaign all about? It was saying that I'll get you a vaccine by November. So the story of health system preparedness doesn't come, whether the health system can deliver that vaccine, even if you have a efficacious vaccine, those are another set of a series of questions. But I really truly believe that this hope and hype around the COVID vaccine is actually a political project, because I do believe scientists and immunologists who work in this field are raising uncertainties about it, which is not being communicated in through the media, certainly.
Can I ask a follow-up question, Sandhya, if you don't mind?
Yes, please. Go ahead, Amar.
Rama and Amitabh, for both of you, isn't it also an economic project? Because before even the vaccine is tested, so much of money is invested in producing it, as if it is going to be successful. And in the webinar one, Dr. Satyajit, who was as a scientist who gave opinion, has also commented saying that the kind of outcome measures you are looking at, perhaps none of these vaccines is going to fail, simply because they are so diluted, right? And there are so much of surrogate endpoints that you are looking at, rather than whether it is going to reduce mortality or actually stop the infection and those kind of stuff. So given that, isn't it a huge economic pressure to ensure that this vaccine succeeds? So it's not just political, it's also money.
Of course. I mean, and I think one of the very interesting things, if you follow the production, so-called, the science, the preparation, the production, and then later the distribution, the global supply chains are all in place. So, and these are global supply chains. So we are supposed to be, somebody is producing the vials, somebody is producing the doses, and then, there is already a booking in the market of, who is going to buy how many doses. And the US is the single largest procurer of doses, followed by us. And so therefore, of course, it's a huge economic game, and you are now far too gone to pull out of it. So, I mean, I think this whole idea of the vaccine capitalism is absolutely significant. And look at the markets. It's a pandemic. The whole globe is your market today for the vaccine. And so, then Gavi gets into it. Bill and Melinda Gates is into it. So, I mean, it is really a combination of the pharma industry with philanthrocapitalists investing in it. And don't forget, India and China are big producers, going to be big producers and big gainers from this whole process. So of course there is an economic dimension to this whole thing.
Thanks. I just want to add to that and ask another question, which is, so there's this economic dimension, a political dimension, and there's also, in a strange way, you might call it the public health dimension, which is, it has to be given to people. People have to get the vaccine. And as Dr. Dutt pointed out, the question is, at what is the level, how do you determine whether a vaccine is good enough to use? and the standards are pretty low. So a vaccine doesn't have to be very effective to pass your regulators, okay, and to be manufactured and then to be either offered or forced upon the public. Now, from my point of view, and I think this actually goes back in some sense to what Anil and Vaishali is saying, if a vaccine is, let's say, 50% effective, that is, I have a 50% chance of not getting the disease, okay, if I take the vaccine, that isn't great for me. I'm not particularly interested in taking a vaccine which has that kind of reduction because I don't know what the other risks are. And in fact, one of the things is that we're talking about a vaccine which you're testing for a very short period, and the safety issue is going to come up maybe after a year or so. So I don't want to take that kind of vaccine. But that particular vaccine may be seen as having a value on a public health level because you give the vaccine to enough people, you break transmission. That is apparently one of the reasons you'd use the vaccine. Now, two questions. One is, if you're distributing the way you're distributing it, will it actually have that effect? If you're giving it to your health workers, your people with diabetes and so on, will it have that effect? I don't know. I mean, it's people like you who did say that. And second is, if you're giving it to me in order to break transmission, I may not want to take the vaccine. Okay? And not only that, but if I were in the trial, the question is, people in the trial, are they aware that this is all that the vaccine might do? You enter a trial, it's not just that you may not get the vaccine, that you get a placebo, the vaccine candidate, you get a placebo. It's also that whatever you get may have very limited efficacy. It may not be, even if you get a vaccine candidate which ends up to meet the standards, it may not be of much use to you. It may not be of much value to you. So I was wondering if Anil and Vaishali have a comment to make on that, and then afterwards the others.
No, we understand that it only at least that is what I understood, that it increases, it produces an immunoresponse, which could help prevent or just like make it better for you to not contact the virus. But we knew that this is not the vaccine. This doesn't prevent you from getting corona completely. We're aware of that. We're also aware that the effect of this might not be very long. Like it might be, from what I understand, it might be up to 6 months. So we were aware of that. But at the same time, I think as a layperson, speaking completely from just as a layperson who's trying to avoid corona news because it's too much to handle mentally. So as that, I think we already know that there is no vaccine yet. So it's like anything that can help is all right. Okay. So like, that's what I understood from this whole thing, from participating in this, that, okay, this is like, people are trying things and this is probably better than what we have right now. So, I mean, we have nothing. So that is what we understood. But we know that this is not going to protect us completely ever. We were aware of that. Yeah, while going into this as well.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I think now open it up for question and answers. So I have a question over here. Are ethics committees for vaccine trials and drug trials the same or different? Dr. Baru, would you like to comment on that?
They're the same. They're the same. I mean, it depends on which institution you're talking about. But in a tertiary hospital setup, you have both vaccine trials and drug trials coming in to the ethics committee.
Dr. Mehendale?
No, yeah, I think Dr. Rama Baru clarified it well. These are the same committees, and for within each committee, there is multi-level expertise available. And so there is really no need to have separate ethics committees for vaccine or drug trials. But if there are some complex issues involved, then there is a provision that for specific ethics committee meetings, some experts can be invited to provide additional insights or give some kind of guidance. But by and large, they are non-voting members, and primarily the committee remains the same.
I have a question here. What are the placebos being used? And is the safety of the placebos been established. Dr. Mehendale would like to comment on that. What kinds of placebos are being used, and how do we establish that the safe?
Yeah, sure.
The safe.
Right. See, in all kinds of vaccine trials, it is advisable to have a placebo group, because some of the adverse effects related to the vaccine product that we are giving, the background effects in particular, one is never able to tease out exactly what is it that is happening due to the vaccine and what is it that is likely to happen even otherwise as a result of reaction to any other product that is present, which is the non-vaccine active ingredient in that particular vaccine trial product. So a placebo which is used, and placebo is normally more or less similar to exactly what is being given in a vaccine candidate minus the vaccine construct which is there. So it is normally an inert substance which is known not to cause any kind of side effects or any kind of reaction. It's supposed to be a harmless substance otherwise. But but it depends on situation by situation. In some of the vaccine trials, as was being just discussed here, there can be comparator vaccine trials, in which case for one group, one particular vaccine is given, for the other group, another type of vaccine is given, where there may not be any use of placebo at all. So it all depends on what type of study design which is being thought of. And so use of placebo is then considered if it is if there is no other comparator vaccine which is available to be used in the study.
I have a question over here about the comment made by Anil Hebbar that someone told that the researchers or the team told him that if he spoke in public, they may not give him the second dose of the vaccine. There are two questions here. One is that what would that mean if the investigator actually said that? But from the other point of view, how if a vaccine is of 2 doses, important is it for the participants, the potential participants, to stay in the trial through the two doses? And how, what are the ways in which one can maximize their staying in the trial, the chances of staying in the trial? I was wondering if Dr. Mehendale and Dr. Baru and then Dr. Mehendale could comment on this. What if there is a 2-dose vaccine? How do you make sure that people who enter a trial do stay for the, not coerced to stay, but how do you make sure that they do take part in the vaccine trial thoroughly?
I think when they're enrolled in the first place, there needs to be transparency and enlist that commitment which Dr. Mehendale spoke about even for the HIV trial. You see, the point really is that you have to give full information. You have to talk about the kind of timeline of commitment that you have to give, and and also that what is the potential side effects that you may experience, and how will you be supported right through. Now, if all these are followed and if a healthy volunteer agrees to be part of the trial, then it is done so with full information. But if I am told halfway that, there needs to be another dose that you have to take before I can, before we can complete the research process, then that's not fair to the participant.
I have a question over here for Dr. Mehendale, which is, what do you think should be done for public engagement now during COVID, and who will be involved in it? What way can the HIV model be followed in a trial like the COVID-19 vaccine trial?
See, I think there are primarily the differences. We had time. We had time in our hands to prepare the community. We had all that was happening. We took nearly 12 months of preparation time to prepare our site, to do some baseline studies, which were done for a much longer period of time. Here, we are a little in a problematic situation in the sense that this particular problem is spreading very quickly, very fast, and we are trying to look at a quick solution or a quick fix to that particular problem. One issue I would like to talk about here is that as a public health person or as a public health specialist, I would always say that vaccine is one of the tools that we would like to, or I would like to explore in this whole scenario. But having said that, I would also like to say that that cannot be the only tool which will be able to prevent and control this particular disease in the long run, because we do not know the kind of vaccine efficacy and the kind of dosage schedule that we are eventually going to come up with. Suppose we have these kinds of vaccines which are being tried, and if they are in the range of 50% efficacy, are they all useless and worthless? I would certainly say no. Even with 50% of efficacy, this is a good starting point. And there is a definite possibility that we could keep working on that. So in the next couple of years, probably we might be able to enhance this efficacy to a higher level, to up to 70%, to a 75% level. But there have been examples in the public health space where vaccines have proved their efficacy in prevention and control, even eradication of certain diseases. So I would look upon vaccines as an important tool for sure, but not necessarily at the cost of neglecting all others. The issue of mutation was also talked about. But you know, one important advance which has happened in the last few years is because of the technology that is available with us. We have been able to master some techniques by which even every year the flu vaccine gets changed. And it is a response to the circulating strains which have been isolated during that particular year and is made available in the new form to those who want it. So this is possible because of the technical advancements. See, all the previous vaccines, the older vaccines used to take 40, 50, 70 years to develop. But we have seen this phenomenon now when we have a vaccine in less than a year. And so there has to be some kind of a trial given very specifically to this concept of vaccines as a potential weapon against this infectious disease. But we should keep in mind that this is not the only solution that we are going to have, particularly because there are going to be issues like multiple doses. So do we have the manufacturing capacity? Do we have the capacity to have as high number of doses as required to say vaccinate a large number of population? And you were talking about breaking the chain of transmission for that matter. Certainly it is not going to be possible in the near future. It will take time. But it doesn't mean that we should give up hopes on that. We should not. We should keep working. We should also keep working very actively on all other methods of prevention as well.
Thank you. There's a question over here about the informed consent form and whether the informed consent form template should be made public.
I am not aware of earlier vaccine development processes. I don't know whether in earlier vaccine development processes, the informed consent was available publicly. That I'm not aware of. But in this one, certainly we don't have. And what Dr. Mehendale described in about the HIV vaccine development process, I think if we have that kind of rigor that is applied, and if that is publicly known, then it does provide a certain amount of confidence into the entire process. And people who participate in the trial, they have a certain they have a much higher degree of confidence in the process. There is a greater transparency. So it just goes on to build the confidence into the system. And we have seen, I'm not very sure about the Indian public, but we have repeatedly seen polls in Europe and America which say that there is a huge trust deficit about the this particular vaccine. I mean, all the coronavirus vaccine candidates that are being developed, and very high proportion of people do not want to go and, would not be willing to take the vaccine even if it was produced by December or January. So the fact that if such processes, even the participant accounts, for example, if that was available and we were able to talk to more and more participants, that also injects a certain amount of confidence into the system, and the fact that people realize that this is an open and transparent system, and then can take very informed decisions about whether they want the vaccine when it becomes available, or they do not want a vaccine, or what they make out of the process. I think it's a very important thing. I don't think it did happen in this particular case.
Thanks a lot. Baru, do you have a comment on this? Whether it's necessary for the public to have access to an informed consent form template, whether we should really know what is being informed to participants in a trial?
Absolutely. I mean, I think I completely agree with Mr. Amitabh that, why should it be shrouded in any secrecy? We should know what is happening. I mean, we can be informed as lay people as to what the consequences of and what is the process that is followed when somebody goes through a trial. I don't think it should be a secret at all.
I ask that simply because that's one of the most difficult things to get for the media or the general public. It's as if the informed consent form is something, if you have access to it, it's because you took it illegally. That's a general impression one gets, because I think only a couple of participants have actually gone ahead and shared the informed consent form. That's really why I asked. But I don't know if people have other people have questions. Does Dr. Mehendale, do you have questions for the others? Does Amar have anything to ask? Because I don't see that there. I see audience questions that there. For some reason, I'm not able to get them over here. You've been receiving them.
Yeah, there are in the Q&A, and then many of them were answered by Sanjay and others. Okay, and Rama, you have one question there. Yeah. And I have one on the adverse event I posted on the chat box, Sandhya. It's about like, since both the shots were given. Yeah. So will there be that kind of follow up with the participants? That is something I just wanted to know regarding all the adverse events in the long term, not only right away, immediate kind of things. So Vaishali has already answered, but yeah.
I'd just like to add to what Sarojini has said. You see, when you say the adverse event and how it's communicated and how it is followed up at the level of the participant. But I think it's very important for trials like this to report adverse events to an oversight committee. Because if you recall, after that AstraZeneca thing came up, Serum Institute also initially said, no, there is no problem. And then they had to actually retract and say, yes, we will look out for those adverse events if they occur in the trial that we are doing. So I think, I somewhere think that it is also the robustness of your regulatory authorities. And I come back to this point, Sandhya, that, when there is a great deal of political pressure and visibility given to the need for development of a vaccine. I completely agree with Dr. Mehendale. I think I'm not in any way diluting the need for a vaccine, but it's only one tool that we are looking at. But at this point in time, it has got tremendous political mileage. And I want to really talk about the way in which this was announced in the Bihar elections. You can see the kind of political mileage that the vaccine, so it's no longer about science, it's no longer about public health people telling you the ifs and buts and the place of vaccines, but it is about a promise which becomes a political promise. And I think, and even when the vaccine is not even there. So I really think that we need to have these transparent mechanisms for transparency. That's why I say the PIS should be made public. Why not? Why can't we look at it? Why can't we have a debate? And like you rightly said, Sandhya, the CTRI, we should really be going and looking at those protocols and studying those protocols. So I think it's a healthy democracy to have transparency in these matters. It doesn't have to be shrouded in secrecy at all. But I do bring back the point that will science get short shrifted? Then there is a lot of political pressure. And I think we need to consider that in the context that it's being developed in. Not just in India, I'm talking about globally.
Now, just going back for 1 second, both what Sarojini said about adverse events, about the follow-up, and what you said, I think, in terms of transparency of the protocol. Now, I understand the Indian trial, the Serum Institute trial, the follow-up is for 6 months. The global trial, the follow-up is for 2 years. Now, given in the context of what Sarojini said about adverse events, if you're following, it's the same thing you're giving in both the trials. But if in one case you're following them up only for 6 months within the trial, and that too, I think, not very actively after the first couple of months, it seems that you're setting up a potential disaster here in India. Because after 6 months, those people are not going to be available to you.
Even the size of the trials, Sandhya, even the size of the trials are very, very different. And we don't know the profiles of the participants, the age groups, how many women have been selected, how many elder groups have been selected. So those kind of things are just not known. So it's not the same trial that is happening. We, of course, seem to be banking a lot on the results of trials, the same vaccine candidate trials that will happen in other countries. And we just seem ready to be able to, at least in part, adopt the results of what comes out in other countries. And what we are doing here does not seem to be independent exercises, but just a complementary addition to the data that would be produced elsewhere. That is what seems to be happening.
Thank you. I just see a question over here. What if I don't want to take the vaccine? Will I be forced to take the vaccine? That might sound a little outrageous, but actually that is an issue that came up with the H1N1 vaccine, I think, when health workers were expected to take the vaccine, but they refused. Now, I understand in this context also, there are two sides to it. One is that you may be required to take a vaccine and refuse. Another is that you might need the vaccine, but you may not get it. So Dr. Rama Baru, could you just comment on that in the context of what you said earlier about the politics of the vaccine?
I said that this really falls into this whole area of vaccine hesitancy. And you see, it's very interesting. The dilemmas and the motivations for it come very differently. The public health community would want high coverage and therefore would certainly persuade and maybe even coerce. We know from other earlier experiences. But there is a very strong pharmaceutical lobby also, to push for uptake of vaccines. And what you find is, so there are two very different, if you like, motivations that are at play. So this whole question of vaccine hesitancy is very different in the West, where in fact, the middle and upper middle classes are making very conscious choices, and they are facing what they call as a public health dilemma, because you cannot persuade. Well, you may be able to persuade, but you certainly can't coerce these sections of the population. But when you come to the Indian context, we normally say that people who are vaccine hesitant are only the poor. And therefore you have to, because they are illiterate and they don't understand science, you have to, in fact, even sometimes coerce them. So you have this situation of how inequalities then play out in the acceptance or the uptake of the vaccine. There are very interesting writings today from, say, the United States, where they say even if the vaccine comes, there are large sections of the African American population who may not be willing to take that vaccine, not because they don't want to take the vaccine, but they don't trust the health services that will deliver. So, there is this thing called the collective memory of how communities and how people respond to, a particular intervention. And the health services and its past history and the level of trust you have in the health services would play a very, very important part in whether you'll want to take vaccine or not. But I do believe that, and I've heard some murmurs around this, that suppose I say tomorrow I will not take the vaccine, will I be seen as an anti-nationalist? It's not too, I mean, it's a kind of a thin line that if suppose I say I will not take the vaccine, then will I be anti-nationalist? I'm just posing it as a question, just to provoke.
Well, can I just, there are just two questions. One is that when you talk about, when we talked about the African-American community in the US, there will be people in India who won't have access to the vaccine by virtue of their own powerlessness. So I would imagine that here, talking about the healthcare workers, you're talking about the bus conductors, the sanitation workers who will not automatically get access to the vaccine, I imagine. There's a question over here which says, there is so much pressure on the stakeholders to approve the vaccine. What role does the scientist, the public health expert, media, EC, what role should they play to pressurize the authorities to follow an open and transparent system? It's not just a matter of the informed consent form becoming public, but also we should know who the members are, the expert committees, the data safety monitoring committees who are deciding the safety, efficacy, and approving the trials. Actually, I have something to add over here, which is why should the public not know exactly what is discussed in an ethics committee meeting? I mean, I want to know what is the limit? What is absolutely must be kept private in all this? Because it seems to me that all of this is our, it's our bodies, it's our resources, our tax. Why should anything be kept private? So I was wondering if Dr. Mehendale can comment on that, and then afterwards, Dr. Baru can comment on that.
No, I would only say that the deliberations as they happen inside the ethics committee are always considered as confidential documents or confidential proceedings there. And let us also accept that all these members of the ethics committee who are sitting there, and nowadays there are very specific regulatory requirements, guidelines, etc., which also require that in addition to the institutionalized institutional members, there are non-institutional members who are a part of the ethics committee as well. So the review that is being conducted by ethics committee members is really unbiased, independent review, and they are the actual, maybe our own representatives, our own, I'm saying as if representing the community. And so whatever are the apprehensions and concerns of the community, they are the ones who are actually looking at it in a critical manner. So let's accept that particular fact. And so what happens is these documents probably are always, if you just look at all kinds of guidelines that are available, they are always considered as confidential documents, and they are not available for public review. We did talk a lot about the informed consent document and the protocol also being available in the public domain. Normally, once the trial gets completed, nowadays there is a trend that many of these investigators do publish their protocol, and because there is some kind of an intellectual property attached to that, and so that is the reason why many of them don't want to say sort of give an access either to the protocol or to the informed consent form because of issues related to that. But as soon as the trial is completed, generally the protocol becomes available for public viewing. So I think this is a difficult question. There is no clear answer to that particular thing. Is there a legal binding in this particular scenario? Then let's just also consider that. Can anybody ask legally any investigator to provide a copy of the informed consent or a copy of the protocol for that matter? I don't know. I truly don't know the answer to this particular question, but I don't believe that there is kind of a legal backing to this kind of a request as well. So because these are considered institutional matters, and when institutions allow a particular investigator to undertake such a kind of a trial, the whole institute and the investigator, along with the ethics committee, they all stand behind him or her to ensure that that particular work is done, or to provide the assurance that that particular work is being done in the right way. So I would say I truly do not have answer to this question very clearly, whether it can be a part of public domain. But we have now reached a stage when everybody seems to agree with this particular part, that informed consent form has to be signed in 2 copies, and 1 copy can be returned back to the participant, or 1 copy has to be offered to be given back to the participant. But in opinion of many of my colleagues, researchers, investigators, you would also find that there is a hesitation on part of the participants to take that particular informed consent form back home also. Because there are, considering our own scenarios, they have the issues that somebody else at home might have a hands on it, and then they may say, I worked in HIV for several years, so for 19 years. So people were always worried that even if it is a HIV prevention, non-vaccine HIV prevention trial also, people would be worried, even if it's an epidemiologic study, I won't like to take this particular consent back home. Somebody may just feel that I am practicing myself some kind of a high-risk behavior. And so you leave it with you. If I need it for some kind of a purpose, I'll come back and take it from you. So there is a provision by which you can offer it to the participant. And that's by far the only way it can be shared, as far as I know.
There is a question that has come in the chat box. This is from Peter Doshi, who is the associate editor of British Medical Journal. A very interesting question that he has asked there. I mean, comment he has made, that when we talk about the efficacy of this vaccine trial, and the efficacy is proved within, say, next a couple of months, these follow-up of these participants for 6 months or 2 years that it is being talked about, will it really take place, or will it be only on paper? Simply because it once you say that a vaccine can be approved with a less efficacy, and once the approval is given, it is ethically necessary to provide that vaccine to the placebo control group. And once you give it to the placebo control, how are you going to continue, following them for next 2 years and find out what significant thing is coming out as a long-term effect of this vaccine? So this is a really an issue that when they talk about 6 months follow-up, is really going to be 6 months follow-up. If it is not going to be, then only we can talk about vaccine being available in November or December or January. Otherwise, you will have to talk about the vaccine, trial getting over after a few more months and perhaps 2 years. So this is an issue that he has raised. Would anyone of you like to respond to that? Are we being taken for a ride when we are told that it is going to be followed up?
Would Dr. Doshi like to speak?
He is in the audience. I don't know whether you can bring him in here to speak.
Yeah, so Amar just explained, I think, quite well, which is that once any declaration of efficacy, whatever that efficacy is, once a declaration of efficacy has been made, a very reasonable assumption is that people will say, well, I was in this trial. I think I received the placebo. I would like to have the vaccine now. And many companies will offer, they'll send a letter or they'll contact these trial participants and they'll say, our vaccine has been deemed efficacious. And now we are offering the vaccine to those people who receive placebo, and you receive placebo. And so at this point in time, which in many of these trials we can expect will happen over the next 1, 2, 3 months, these trials will no longer be randomized trials of 2 randomized groups, a vaccine group and a placebo group. So if you're interested in long-term efficacy, if you're interested in the difference between adverse events between the placebo group and between the vaccine group, you won't get it from these trials anymore. So the trials are extremely limited in this sense if they're going to be essentially declared over once somebody says this vaccine is effective. And then the question really becomes, what did you define as efficacy? And I think you might have discussed in the last webinar, but definition of efficacy right now essentially could be something as simple as people don't have mild symptoms anymore. And if that effect is largely driven by healthier people, and there's no efficacy in the elderly, we won't know that. And so we'll have no decrease in the hospitalizations, no decrease in ICU use, no decrease in deaths. All these things won't be determined. And I think that's a huge problem, because that's ultimately the central question that I think everybody expects. This vaccine should reduce the most severe consequences of the disease.
Thank you, Dr. Doshi. Just bring
Sandhya,
me back.
can I try to answer that?
Certainly.
Yeah, although I'm not involved with COVID trials at all, I'm not doing a COVID trial. See, what is primarily required here is, if it is a 6 months trial or if it is a 12 months trial, two specific endpoints are very clearly defined. Efficacy endpoint is ability to produce the disease or occurrence of that disease either in the vaccine group or in the placebo group. Well, when we keep collecting the data during the trial process, we don't know whether a person has received a vaccine or a placebo. So we just go on collecting data on all those who become sick to try and figure out whether they are suffering from COVID infection. And subsequently, it gets analyzed when the trial is over to figure out how many of them were in the vaccine group and how many were in the placebo group. That's only the issue related to efficacy. Efficacy denotes ability of a vaccine to prevent the occurrence of the disease. The second issue which was being discussed was related to the safety. Safety is another angle which is really also a critical angle here, because there could be some short-term side effects of a vaccine. There could always be a possibility of some long-term side effects, which might not get captured, as has been mentioned, in the 6 months of follow-up that has been planned in a particular study. And Amar was referring to a particular situation where, say, for example, if there is an interim analysis planned for certain trials, say my particular trial was supposed to have gone for 6 months or for 12 months, but I have built in an interim analysis at the end of 3 months, because if this vaccine is extraordinarily effective, then just by looking at the data at the end of 3 months in an unblinded manner, the Data Safety Monitoring Board, which is an external agency, if that detects that among the vaccinees, the chances of getting this COVID infection are far much less, then this vaccine is so protective that there is absolutely ethical issue in continuing this trial for a longer time. Well, this decision is essentially keeping in mind the efficacy endpoint. This does not necessarily take into account the safety endpoint, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to stop the trial. That only means that at that particular time point, the randomization needs to be broken down. If there is a clear evidence of vaccine efficacy, what can be done is all those who were in the placebo group can be considered for giving vaccination because it has proved to be effective. But then you continue to follow this particular population for the desired length of time to understand how many of them are developing any kind of adverse reactions or side effects to prove its safety. That's the way the things work in vaccine trial. Although I'm not directly connected with COVID vaccine trials, this is how all the vaccine trials would work.
So I guess the two issues there would be what kind of pressure there would be, what kind of low bars there would, the low bar for efficacy, and second is the pressure to make the vaccine available. But I want to just we're running out of time, and I just want to make one last request to Dr. Rama Baru. This is a question over here regarding the making documents public. So the person has said public and media do not take part in the benefit or risk of a vaccine trial. Only the subject takes part in the risk or success of the trial. So why should any document be shared to the public or media by the investigator?
I agree that it is the subject who is most important, right? But at the same time, I think public scrutiny is always good. You need the media. It's to keep keep the process of the trial transparent. It is also to keep a check on the pharmaceutical industry, which does these trials. And therefore, it's important. And I want to go back to what Dr. Sanjay Mehendale said. And he said that, yes, there are certain discussions in an ethics committee meeting which are confidential. But the only issue I want to raise is that there are ethics committees where this deliberation and discussion actually happens in a very live manner. There are differences of opinion. There is a lot of discussion not only on just the PIS or the patient information sheet, but there is also questions around the science, and which is why the composition of the ethics committee becomes very important. But we also know there are private ethics committees which are approving trials. So, I mean, I think there is no one uniform ethics committee, deliberations that we can even comment on. And I think that is an issue of, what is the credibility of the ethics committee and how much space is actually given for deliberations and discussions. So I think that is an issue, and I'm sure it's an issue that has been written about quite a bit, even in the IJME. But coming back to this, I think it is important to have some transparency. I mean, I think the issue that Sanjay Mehendale raised was very important. Is there a legal backing for even the release of PIS into the public domain? Actually, I don't know. I mean, and suppose tomorrow I legally demand that the PIS of a particular study protocol should be made available. How do I get it? Do I write to the ethics committee? It's back to me saying, sorry, we can't. Then I have to move the courts. And what do the courts have to say about it?
Rama, why can't the patients release it?
They can if they wish.
It is a contract between patient and the participant and the researcher.
They're right.
I can make my contract public. What is wrong?
Absolutely. But I'm saying from the other end, if you want to go through the institutional end, then there are these hurdles. But as a participant in a trial, you can say it is my right to share this in the public domain. And I don't think that can be contested.
There is no legal document that says it should be private. This is just understanding that people have.
From the ethics committee side, like Sanjay Mehendale said, I may not be able to give as a member of an ethics committee, say that I want to make it public. But I think the point that Amar is raising is very important, which is that as a participant or a subject, I can certainly say, okay, let me go and give it to Amitabh and say, please write something on this. It need not always be a situation of being aggrieved, but it may be a situation of saying that, can we scrutinize this? Is this robust enough to cover all our concerns? And I think that it's an important thing to do. Because, let me tell you only one thing, that I think PIS has now become a requirement for all protocols. But the other issue is how you transact that PIS. I can get a signature from a patient because, the patient says, how will I even question this doctor? How many of us actually sit and read? There is this whole question of transacting the PIS and then having the PIS be understood by the participant. And I think that's what Dr. Mehendale's example of the HIV vaccine was very educative for me, that they actually went through the process of figuring out, what did you understand after reading that PIS? And I can tell you, PIS can be written very badly for most protocols.
Just a thing that 4 companies have made their vaccine protocols public. Nobody stopped them from doing it. There was no law to stop them, right? Bharat Biotech can also make its protocol public, but they are not making it. Although it is in collaboration with the Indian Council of Medical Research. And why they are not doing it? Why Zydus is not doing it? Why Sputnik protocol is not in public, which are being tried out in India?
Absolutely.
I'm quite amazing. I mean, it seems that those protocols which are more India-centric, they are never made public, but those which are international, they seem to be going into the public. So where is the law? There is no question of law here. There is a question of readiness of the scientists, readiness of the company, sponsors, and the participants to come out in public and talk about it. How can anybody threaten Anil Hebbar, who goes and tells everybody what was his experience in the clinical trial? He has the right to talk about it.
Yes, he should.
There is no law which can stop.
And the burden of transparency, what you're doing is you're putting the burden of making this available on the participant of all people. It is only the participant who's going to, and at a threat also there.
And I also think I want to bring back this issue. The class background of the participant becomes very important. So if you are in a position where you can speak for a lot of people who don't have a voice when they become participants, I think it is important for you to raise concerns as a participant and also say that this is not how I want to be treated. I'm not just some object to be injected in and then, I'm passive recipient. I'm not.
So I think in that note, maybe we can have Anil and Vaishali give their closing comments, and Amitabh, if Amitabh would like to start, and then Anil and Vaishali, if they can give their closing comments. I think I'm getting a message that
I already wrote my
we have about 1 minute each. We have about 1 minute.
I already wrote my comment, and the form does not prohibit us, as far as I understand. There is nothing that says. It just has a random stamp at the end which says confidential, but we don't know confidential for who. So there is nothing that should prevent me from sharing the form right away, actually. And I don't know why we didn't. So that is something for us to reflect as well. And at the same time, the doctors did not say anything explicitly the last time we went, because we did discuss that, because they did read the papers and they had our names, and they said that, no, you can absolutely speak about the study. It's your right. They just, it's sort of like an advisory that don't mention your names, or, I don't know why. They did not explain why, but they said that it's your right. You can do what you'd like. So yeah, but there is like this, I think we just assume that we shouldn't, probably because we don't know what it's going to be used as. And it's not like this issue is not going to be politicized, or it's not like they were like, it's also about, will this be used to malign or do something else, so there's always that fear. You don't know. So I think we'd rather not do something, is what I've been thinking. But I think we can share the form, and it should be shared more than anything. It should be made public for sure. So yeah, I think I'd be happy to share the PDF I have.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Vaishali.
And thank you for inviting me to this. I did not know.
Great to hear all that. It was great to hear all that. Amitabh and then Anil. I don't know if Anil's online.
Okay, just a short point. I think, right from the very beginning, when we started to talk about vaccines for coronavirus, like it was very amply clear that the process that would be followed for this particular vaccine development would be very, very different from what the vaccine developments have been in the past. And that was because of the nature of the emergency that was right there. It was very clear that the usual process that probably years or even decades that go into a vaccine development is not going to be acceptable in that situation. And probably it was a reasonable sort of an argument to make that you need to fast track. Now I'm told just fast tracking the vaccine process itself does not undermine the integrity of the entire process, or does not necessarily compromise on the safety aspect of the vaccine. Which is to say that there are several steps in the vaccine development process which can legitimately and very genuinely be fast-tracked without compromising on the integrity of the process at all. Now, all that was fine, and that argument is, in fact, it can be argued that it's in the public interest to have, a vaccine out in the open at as fast as quickly as it is possible. While that argument is perfectly fine. The problem came when you had these kind of impossible timelines that are set or impossible targets that are set. And it also meant that some of the essential parts, essential steps of the vaccine development process would actually be dropped in order to fast track the vaccine, which actually saw the Russian vaccine or the Chinese vaccines. They did not even have the phase 3 trials before they were approved. So, and a similar suggestion was probably made when we were faced with the same thing, that a vaccine probably would be made available before August 15th deadline. So that kind of thing, when it came, and it was that created an outrage, and probably that was set to rest, that it's not going to happen. All on those aspects, I think the kind of information that was out there and the way awareness did spread, I think that was fairly okay. What has not happened is when you wanted to ask more critical questions, or when you wanted to ask more intrusive, the information which was considered much more intrusive, those are the things that are not in the open or not being provided. You are supposed to be happy with what the company says. For example, even on the issue of pricing, or even on the issue of who exactly are you making the deals with, or why is a particular vaccine, particular vaccine is being preferred over the others that are under development. Now those are the sort of things that are probably stonewalled or being politely turned down as of now, which I think some of these questions, at least once information is out in the public domain, would again help the cause of transparency, will help people make much more informed choices, would be much better aware of what is going in these processes. So I think one part, it's not that there is no information out there. Some of it is, I mean, the kind of reporting that has happened on the vaccine, of course, wouldn't see any in previous instances, for example. But yeah, some critical things missing.
Thanks. So, I mean, I hate to use the expression take back points, but it seems to me that the central theme through all of this has been transparency. At every level of this research, from what the vaccine candidate is to how it is going to be used, and every level of the trial process. On that note, I'll close. Thank you very much. I see Anil is not available. Thank you very much for everybody.
Thank you, sir.
I'm handing over to you.
I think the ending it at transparency is a very good point, because our next webinar has a transparency is one of the themes. So it will be good connection to this webinar. Sarojini, are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Rama and Sanjay. And all the participants staying till the end, and then asking such interesting questions. I think it is a very rich webinar, and we really look forward for more understanding and work on, particularly related to the the participants and their own. How do we make sure that participants' rights can be upheld? I think that is the and there is a transparency thing which Amal said in the end. So the next webinar, we still have 3 more, and we hope we are very happy. Like we had enough participants even today too. Like people who came again for this, and then we hope it will be. We will have much more in the next 3. This next one is on the regulation of COVID-19, vaccination and in the trials. We have, Chinu Srinivasan, who is from Low Caste, he will be moderating. Same time, it is on the 11th November from 3:30 to 5:30, and we will be talking about the legal perspectives and regulations on the approvals of COVID vaccine clinical trials. Senior Advocate Anand Grover, who's with Lawyers Collective and who was a former United Nations Special Rapporteur on Right to Health. He will be joining us. And then we have one presentation on the transparency in the regulatory approvals of COVID-19 vaccines. Malini Isola, who's very active on the chat. She will be a part of it. And we have approving and monitoring of the COVID vaccine clinical trials. Regulator perspective, we have sent a request to DCGI, Drug Control General of India, and they said they will confirm today. So we just kept it to be confirmed. We hope they will come and then, respond to certain concerns which we are raising here as a regulator, and while approving or licensing these trials, which will be very, very important. And then we are still calling them and then checking with them. And we also have another speaker talking about the implementation, approving, and monitoring of the COVID vaccine clinical trials. Ethics Committee perspective, Dr. Samiran Panda from the National Institute of Cholera and Enteric Diseases, Indian Council for Medical Research. And then, of course, we have Dr. Anant Bhan, who will be talking on the monitoring mechanisms and transparency issues. He is quite well known. He is a researcher, bioethicist, and he's working on global health and health policy. It will be moderated by Chino, and we hope we will be taking this discussion forward from the participants' perspectives. The initial first one was on the science and ethics part, and then now the informed consent and participants' perspectives and PI's perspective, and then moving on to the regulation, and then we move on to the intellectual property rights and with the public health in the fifth webinar. So the link has been there, and you can access the previous webinars, PPTs on some website too. And thank you all, and thanks very much, all of you, and look forward to see you all on the 11th at 3:30 and also later. Thank you so much. Thank you all.